price pop today. Investors are interested. I'm going to take as much money as I can right now because I don't know when the window's going to open again. It just creates a lot of really bad behavior on both sides that I think, doesn't help, again, the ultimate goal of creating value and returning capital to shareholders.
Less staring at the share chart on a daily basis, but the outcomes focused in terms of how the business and operation is run.
Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. First of all, thanks so much for watching this video. If you like it, give us a thumbs up. It just helps us to understand where we should be spending our time, money and effort. And of course, you can leave a comment below. Helps us understand the sorts of questions you think we should be asking, how you think we've done, of course, what you thought of this interviewee. You can catch this as a podcast, article or transcription on cruxinvestor.com. And of course, for our Crux Investor Club members, you get early access to this video. And if you haven't already done so, please click the button in the corner of the screen to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, for more videos like this, click the notification bell. We spoke earlier today to Mark Selby. He is our nickel market commentator. He's also CEO of Canada Nickel Corp, TSX-V listed nickel company with assets in Canada. This week, we sort of run through a variety of topics, obviously price, top of the list, but also Tesla's quarterly call. Some interesting statements there from Elon Musk. Please manufacture all the nickel you can, he says to nickel companies. So that's an easy request, slightly harder to deliver on. So we talk around some of the topics there and a multitude of the macro factors going on in the market. So take a look at the description below, some of the topics discussed. Anything interests you in particular, click on the number beside the topic. That's called a timestamp, and I'll jump you through to that part of the video. Otherwise, enjoy what Mark has to say. Mark, how are you doing, sir?
Excellent, sir. Good to see you once again. I actually can see you better because I've got my glasses back. They broke, and so I was with my readers, which don't quite work. So I can actually see clearly now. So yeah.
Yes. Oh right. Poor you. I lose mine quite often. And then my children tell me they're on my head. You kind of do that thing, and then you go, "Where are my glasses?" I've reached that age.
Mine fell out when I was cutting the lawn, and then I drove over it with the lawn tractor. So
that would definitely do it.
Made them
well done.
Somewhat inoperable. Yeah.
Well done. That's spectacular. Well, I better put them back on because I can't see you or the page in front of me at the moment. So we're here for our weekly catch up on nickel.
Yeah.
And we both were listening to the Tesla. What would you call it? Their
quarterly call.
Quarterly call, that's it. That's the word. It's losing glasses and my memory. But I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was fascinating because it was quite insightful. It's the way that certainly Elon Musk and Tesla are thinking, and I think others will follow suit quite quickly. But the one big phrase which stood out for me was, please mine more nickel. Don't wait for the prices to go up.
Yes.
Well, that's more easily said than done. So what was your take on the call?
Oh, no, it was fascinating. I mean, to me, first, I would encourage people who are interested in nickel to listen to that sort of, 2 minutes of it so that you can actually, sort of hear what the context was. But for me, the fact that he was answering that, came up with that response in a question to sort of overall battery constraints. So, investor was asking, what is... sounds like you might be less concerned about battery constraints, and he launched right into, please mine more nickel. But I think there were several sort of dimensions to that were pretty key. Is A, don't wait for the price to move. B, if you can do it in an environmentally sensitive way. And then 3, if you can do it efficiently. So I think, those are the 3 key things that they're thinking about. And obviously, they haven't gotten there because, he also talks in the call about how they don't need any cobalt, but he's gone off and signed a couple of cobalt deals, but he hasn't signed any nickel deals, at this point. So, I think that, his comments really sort of highlight some of the key constraints in the industry that I've we've started talking about in some of these calls. But I think, he drove it home to what the exact.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's interesting. Slightly conflicting messages there, as you say, around cobalt. He's talking about cobalt-free batteries, but then goes out and invests in some cobalt. But let's kind of break down on the stuff which we did understand, which was the phrase,
sure.
Okay, and try and understand what it means. He says to nickel miners, don't wait What did you read into that?
Yeah, what that fundamentally is reflecting is at $6 a pound today, there really is no project outside of Indonesia that could go ahead, assuming a $6 long-term nickel price, or at least for a period of time, until the capital is paid back. Most projects anywhere to sort of 650 to 750 a pound is required. Again, we're hoping our project, given what we're seeing so far, might be a little bit below that. But, realistically, that's the, for the next set of projects to be developed, that's the kind of price range that you need. Again, he's kind of wishful thinking that, nickel prices aren't there yet. So again, the big miners aren't going, until they're very confident, or the price, more likely the price is actually in that range, before they're going to push a button on any kind of expansions. So I think that's the issue, there that he's kind of really sort of driving home.
But it's kind of interesting. But someone like him, they've got all the money in the world. They've no problem raising money. You look at their market cap, is frightening. Nothing is impossible. But for miners, there's a whole different bunch of constraints around that. Price being one, or the cost of money being the other. So, what do you do off the back of that? It's nice to hear, but it doesn't change anything, does it?
No, I think the key thing is again, it's always tough, even for someone who's a pretty bold innovator like Elon Musk, is you haven't seen yet a car company invest directly into a mining project, and that's, I think if you want nickel at a price that's going to, start at $6 a pound rather than higher, then he's going to have to think about that. And so again, it just takes time for corporations to get around, to what model might work for them. So, there's been models that work for Japanese trading companies in terms of how they invest in projects, and there's other ways that people joint venture in projects. I think, the Teslas of the world need to, think about how they do it. I mean, to me, one model that makes a lot of sense is, with, Eric Sprott does a great job of advancing, 50 different gold projects simultaneously. He's not funding the 100% of the cost for each one of those, but he makes a 5 to 10% investment in a company that allows that company to probably raise double that. And then sort of once they've been Eric Sprott endorsed, it makes it much easier for them to raise capital, from the group of individuals and funds who follow along with Eric. So, he's able to put a little bit of his capital in, and again, all the smart mining people are really good at using other people's money, to multiply the value on their money. So I think, again, hopefully, I'm pretty sure Tesla is thinking about those types of models, and to me, that would be one way to do it. Is, again, you don't need to pick a winner, and you don't have to bet $100-200 million at this point. But even just endorsing 2, 3, 4 companies, that could potentially get there. If you want that nickel in 5 or 10 years, you're going to have to start doing something like that. And again, a Tesla endorsed company, whoever gets those first couple of investments, will be well off to the races, because there'll be all of a sudden a slew of institutional and retail money come at that company to be able to advance the nickel project. So
it's interesting. I mean, the way you talk about that, you're encouraging Elon Musk to be more like Eric Sprott, and I'm coming at it from the point of view: shouldn't we try and ask people like Eric Sprott to be more like Elon Musk? I mean, how do you innovate in this space? Not just nickel, but mining. You and I have come from outside of the mining space originally, and you see these innovators in different sectors solve problems which people who've been in there too long can't. I mean, do you think, is that coming through AI? Do you think it's coming through? I mean, how do we get better at doing what we're doing?
Yeah, no, I think AI on the exploration side is definitely going to open a huge amount of doors, and you're already starting to see that. I think we're just in the early stages. I mean, to my mind, we've gone through several sort of exploration waves. If you look at, just as an example, sort of the great VMS deposits that have been discovered globally, you had in the early 1900s, you had the sort of the walk-on ones where a prospector was banging through the bush, saw some rock that looked interesting, banged it, got an assay. He's like, oh, I found, a mass, millions of tons of copper and zinc and silver. And so things like, Sullivan in Canada, anyways, example, the Sullivan mine, Hudbay, and so forth. And so, that was that generation. Then we had the second generation is when, geophysics started to be really well used in the late 50s, early 60s. And so, people stopped finding deposits at surface because they'd walked everywhere where you could potentially find one. And then, they found deposits like Kidd Creek in Bathurst in New Brunswick, which were sitting not very deep below the surface, but below the surface. And so, they had been missed at that time. We really haven't had that next sort of evolution of exploration discoveries. And I really do think AI is going to be that kind of, because again, we've walked on pretty much everywhere we can go. We've seen sort of the shallowest places and places where we most likely think about where things could be. And so I think now we need to use big data, with some smart minds to kind of understand where we may find deposits that we hadn't found them before. That's on the exploration side. And nickel, again, we don't have a large project pipeline. That's a critical issue in the nickel space. So, there's a significant amount of effort that's needed on that point just to sort of start, finding some initial, new discoveries. In terms of the rest of the sector, it really comes down to competition for capital. Mining has always done such a horrible job of destroying capital and not doing a very good job at actually returning much capital to shareholders. And so, again, I think, at some point, and again, I think, what I'm excited about is, sort of having Tesla and that world sort of make that connection, to the mining space is that, if we're able to get some patient private equity money, into the space, then I think that, will start, will allow mining more junior mining companies, more different stage mining companies, make smarter decisions. Because, again, private equity doesn't all, they invest in lots of high risk businesses that, again, things like pharma, high tech, it's not like every investment you make is a home run. But, once you know that there's a funding pipeline behind you, as opposed to, okay, the price popped today, investors are interested, I'm going to take as much money as I can right now because I don't know when the window's going to open again. It just creates a lot of really bad, bad behavior on both sides, that I think, doesn't help, again, the ultimate goal of, creating value and returning capital to shareholders in the future. So, again, I'm hoping Elon's discussions here will lead to, more private equity, and that, private equity start to look at, at mining, because there is, I think, a massive amount of value to be unlocked if it's done properly.
I think you used a phrase there. It was called, you said patient private equity. And I mean, come from private equity, that's definitely not a word I put with private equity. And because of the impatient nature of private equity, it drove people to do better because the demands were there to see, make changes, make adjustments, tweak things on almost a daily basis to improve outcomes. And I think possibly this sector needs more of that, less staring at the share chart on a daily basis, but be outcomes focused in terms of how the business and operation is run. And I think might be beneficial. And that's why I'm intrigued by, these curious minds like Elon Musk approaching the mining sector and sort of putting a rocket under it with obviously the luxury of a lot of money behind it too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's one venture, Cobalt Metals, that has attracted a bunch of basic, private equity money. And this is, a venture that's basically said, look, we need more nickel and cobalt outside of high risk areas. And we're going to start to apply big data to solving that problem. So, that to me was quite encouraging. What was also encouraging was their first land acquisition was next to a company that I'm on the board of called Orford Mining. So, I think the data has pointed to what we saw 6 or 7 years ago, but we need more of those types of ventures, and we need more of those type of investors in the space. If we're going to get nickel, all the nickel that Elon says he needs, in the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, let's finish off on the Elon statement, because it was mine more nickel, came with some conditions came with
Yes.
needs to be environmentally friendly and efficient, which I'm reading as economic. So
Yeah.
again, what's your take? I mean, clearly ESG is a big part of this. Environmentally friendly or sensitive, sure, of course.
Well, the big, where that's really coming from, and again, I sort of hinted at it, in the past, and it is something I'm going to be spending a lot more time talking about is, when you look at where most of the nickel supply growth has come from over the last 5 years, it's been, nickel pig iron in Indonesia. Before that, it was, nickel pig iron in China. And then, looking forward over the next 5 years, literally, I don't know the exact number, but probably more than 100% of the supply growth, because there are again other operations that are still shrinking, will come from nickel pig iron and other projects in Indonesia. And the challenge with nickel in a place like Indonesia is that processing laterite ore requires huge amounts of electricity. In Indonesia, with the exception of PT Inco, who's built a bunch of hydroelectric dams in Sulawesi, it all comes from coal-fired power. And then you need to use some more coal to change the mineral into a metal. So to make 1 ton of nickel at one of these NPI projects, you're using 25 to 30 tons of coal, and you multiply that by 2.8. Gives you 80, 75 to 90 tons of CO2 per ton of nickel. So even if you took 50 kilos of that and put it in a battery, I'm not sure Elon Musk would like 1 or 2 tons of CO2 strapped to his Tesla, because he used some nickel that came from that source. The other projects that are being considered in Indonesia are looking at HPAL projects, and we've talked about HPAL from time to time. The problem with HPAL is again you're taking out about 1% of the material, and you end up with 99 tons of it of tailings for every ton that you process, and again piling up that type of waste in a highly seismic area is not necessarily, we've seen, issues in certain locations when it's not done properly. And so, a bunch of those operations are looking at deep sea tailings, again, VW, BMW, Tesla, I don't think are very happy knowing that the product that they might be purchasing is, spewing 99 tons of tailings in an uncontained way into the sea. To get the nickel and cobalt that they need. So, again, so Tesla's stepping back and looking and saying, okay, in this industry, all of this growth is coming from these, these particular projects, which, have a pretty high environmental footprint attached to them. So that's where his environmentally sensitive, parts coming from. And again, we have some nice inherent advantages in our project that we'll be talking about a lot more in the coming weeks here. But
well, that's fascinating, because it's not just Elon Musk that's going to influence, but it's the big funds. We've spoken to the Fidelities and the BlackRocks of this world who are moving over to this, ESG-led investing theory, that sort of thesis that they have, which means that if there are nickel HPAL projects, and those sorts of numbers in terms of the carbon footprint and whatever spewing into the sea, that's going to influence their ability. When you go to the investment committee and say, well, should we be investing in this HPAL project or a sulfide project, you're going to get 2 very different answers.
Yeah. Oh no. And again, I think that's where, again, mining companies really need to sort of, what worked, in the last century, the last millennium, isn't going to work in this next one. I mean, you really need to think about, okay, how are we going to, design and construct and operate our project in a way that's going to have the lowest environmental footprint possible. Because again, mining, a big part of it's a capital intensive industry, and it's about competing for, the way, if you're able to compete for capital you're more competitive and you're able to get it at a lower price, that is going to have again, in terms of Elon's other goal of having, sort of the most efficient and lowest cost type of metal to market. If you can do the kind of thing that gives yourself the broadest investor base possible, then you're going to be a winner, right? And again, we're going to be talking about that at Canada Nickel, because again, we realize that we have to start mining for the new millennium and not get away from the way we've been doing it in the past.
No, it's interesting. I think there's a whole big discussion there in terms of retail investors or family office investors. What should we be looking at investing in? Because unless you get the big momentum of some of these funds behind the company, there is no future. It's a sort of stagnant future for them in a way. But maybe a discussion for another day. But think about what you're investing in, which leads on nicely to a question sent in. I said we'd do some of these, so it's sent in by one of the followers of the show, a subscriber to Crux Investor. How can a retail investor best validate the claims of a company as it relates to their assets? And I guess that touches upon some of the things you just said, but it also, I think what you just said is a new thought and quite a good one. But how would a retail investor with limited access to research go and validate what the company has told them?
Yeah, so there's again, that's a challenge, right? Retail investor can't go out and hire an engineering consulting firm to evaluate that an institution or a strategic investor could do. So I would say there's two things to do. One is, in Canada anyways, you get access to the full 43-101 report. On the ASX, you get the press release that's attached to the, when they complete the report, but you can't actually get the full report. But you do get a bunch of the information in the press release. Look at who did the work. Again, I think we've talked about this on another call, but there's two groups of engineers. There's people who do studies that get hired by junior mining companies and to come up with good numbers that someone can sign off on, but they've actually never built anything or haven't built anything in 30 years. And so, put a big question mark around the quality of those estimates. And then there's the engineering firms that actually not just do studies, but actually build things and have built things within the past decade. So, in terms of the quality of the estimate, you're going to get a much better estimate from those group of companies. Again, if it's a mining company that's serious about actually advancing their project, they're not going to use, Joe Engineering Co. or Jane Engineering Co. They're going to go with the person who has the reputation that when they go to pitch the project to joint venture partners and other larger mining companies, those companies know they can rely on those numbers. The second thing to do is just try and find projects that have been built within the last, again, as close as possible, within 5 years or 10 years. Try and find, if it's, using nickel example, look at ferronickel projects that have been built in the last few years. Look at HPAL projects that have been built in the first few years. And again, it doesn't take a lot of, and maybe this is something we can put together in the next few weeks, is just some historical benchmarks that just say, okay, look at the capital cost, look at, how many tons of ore were they going to process, how many tons of metal were they going to produce, what's the operating cost, what's the capital cost, and again, 7 or 8, it's not, you don't need to go through 20 numbers, it's just pulling those 7 or 8 numbers and looking at those 7 or 8 numbers for some historical projects, and just to see sort of, okay, how in line are they, and if they're significantly different and they haven't explained why they're significantly better, then there's probably a good chance that they're actually not going to be significantly better. So that's what I do when I'm looking at in other projects, and I've done in a corporate development role. I mean, that's what so I'd encourage people to definitely do that.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that would be quite interesting if we could help maybe put together the 7 or 10 numbers that people should be looking at. I think obviously if you're able to help, that would be for nickel, because different commodities have different types of ratios that you should be looking at. With regards to again, sticking with the Elon theme, if we may, just for a little bit longer, okay? Because Elon talks regularly about his gigafactories and so forth, and we talked last week about the fact that currently nickel's used mostly in stainless steel. That's its biggest market, but going forward, the gigafactories are going to be built. these actually seem to be the numbers certainly seem to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, is there a number that people are attributing to, as a percentage of the nickel market, where this nickel's going? I mean, is EV going to be 10% of the market, 20% of the market?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, Glencore has put out a few numbers, and again, they've probably got as much market presence as anybody. And and they were forecasting a few years ago that we need 1.3 million tons by 2030. And that's equal to about 60% of what nickel supply was in 2018. So and that's on top of the nickel growth. That's still not a huge amount of, that's basically getting to 25 to 30% of the market, going towards electric vehicle being sold on that basis. There's forecasts now that, again, once you get to a certain tipping point, you're going to see things accelerate much more quickly than people think. Again, in my view, I wasn't surprised to hear Elon Musk talk about constraints around when the question about constraints came up, he immediately leapt to nickel because, again, to produce that much nickel, by 2030, in addition to all the growth nickel that's required for stainless steel and all the other applications, in my mind, is going to be extremely challenging. So, the other part that he did talk about on the call is that, that there's, they very much see sort of two strata. They have lithium iron phosphate, which is for the low end, lower end part of the market, and they talk about their nickel-based batteries as for the upper end of the market, and that's the way they're thinking about a lithium iron phosphate supply chain and a nickel supply chain. And so, that, and again, their battery technology day is coming up. So the fact that they haven't stopped talking about nickel says that nickel's going to be playing a pretty essential and long-term role as part of their battery platform going forward.
I think so. I mean, again, listen to that quarterly call. They're talking about mega packs, etc. So I think they've got big plans for sure. Just in terms of time, though, nickel price fallen back a bit this week. Why?
Again, I was surprised that it moved higher, and it was trading alongside some momentum drivers around the Shanghai Index, and then the copper prices had moved, and so had moved along with it. Both of those have come off, and it came off until Elon talked last night, and nickel's now back up 20 cents, up over $6.10 a pound. Again, he's the kind of guy that can move markets. So again, my question is, fully believe in medium and long-term fundamentals. I'm not sure the near-term fundamentals support pricing above that. So we'll see whether sort of that nickel price erodes back to $6 here over the next month or two. But again, in a year or so from now, 6 months to a year from now, if he opens his mouth and the market's a lot tighter, then those are the kind of things that all of a sudden you wake up and the price is up 50 cents to $1 over a week. So hopefully we'll see that sooner than later, but it's not going to happen in the next few weeks.
Okay. Yeah, retiming. Okay. A little bit more M&A in the market. In fact, something quite a lot about.
Yes, a project I'm extremely familiar with. So Karora, which was RNC Minerals, has sold the remaining interest in Dumont to Waterton. So for some cash up front and then some residual payout, based on a future sale. The big thing there is you now have the 3 large-scale advanced low-grade nickel sulfide projects have all been acquired in the past 6 weeks. This is far faster, than I thought they would. So you've got BHP acquiring Honeyman Wealth and Norilsk, Oz Minerals acquiring the 30% of Nebo Babel that they didn't own by taking over Cassini Resources, and now Waterton consolidating, their ownership. In RNC Minerals. So you've got, the 3 most advanced nickel sulfide, large-scale, low-grade nickel sulfide assets, owned by 3 very tight-fisted owners who will not part with them, or either will never sell them, or you will only part with them at a pretty high valuation. So again, it's helpful for the Canada nickel story and then other earlier stage nickel sulfide developments out there.
Got it. Now, discretion may be the better part of valor here, but the market seems unsure how to read that. It was effectively $10.7 million cash, and up to, I can't remember if it's 42 or 46 million bucks, depending on where nickel goes going forward. Do you feel that's a good deal? Would you have been happy with that?
Yeah, no, I think, you had two specific groups with, very specific different sets of interests at this point. Karora is now very focused on gold. And so, again, knowing the gold assets they have, we acquired Beta Hunt and Higginsville while I was there, and they were both spectacular assets. So I think the opportunity to get some more cash now to unlock even more value at those assets made a lot of sense, and they still retain some upside, if and when the project gets sold, but you could easily contemplate a scenario where, a transaction for Dumont doesn't happen for 4 or 5 years because Waterton is going to wait for the absolute peak in the nickel market before they exit that position. So, again, every deal you have to make a few trade-offs, and I think, given where, Karora is, that deal definitely made sense for them.
Okay. Well, Mark, thanks very much for that. Another week in the world of nickel. I think what's interesting to me is the amount of M&A that's happening in this space now. Obviously, it helps with Mr. Elon Musk, saying what he's said. But even before that, and despite that, I think, nickel assets are being mopped up here, and I think it'd be interesting to sort of see where things go over the next 6 months or so, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think, we said all along that there's only a handful of nickel assets. It's not like gold where you've got, literally hundreds of gold companies and new ones emerging at every stage. There's a very short list of nickel companies. And so, and again, nickel hasn't started to move yet, but you can see one comment from Elon makes the nickel price go up 3%. So again, I would encourage investors to not wait too long and make sure you're positioned because, as you said, three assets have gone in the last 6 or 7 weeks here that, I didn't think we would see, transacted on for at least another year or two. So
interesting times. Okay, Mark, we'll catch you next week.
All right. Sounds good, sir. Take care.